Conference Hall Theta was not designed for comfort. It was designed for survival, which should have been everyone's first clue that this particular educational seminar was going to be memorable for all the wrong reasons. Before we begin, YouTube shows me that 93% of you haven't subscribed yet. Subscribing is free, it really supports our community, and I'd love for you to be part of it. Also, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. The hall sat within the Interspecies Relations Institute, a massive orbital facility that hung in space like a bureaucratic nightmare wrapped in titanium and good intentions. 238 beings from across known space had gathered here, each occupying specially designed seating that accommodated everything from gelatinous blobs to crystalline structures to things that technically existed in 4 dimensions, but were polite enough to compress themselves into 3 for meetings. At the front of the room stood Colmeth, and Colmeth was not happy. Then again, Colmeth was never happy. His species, the Vreniks, had evolved on a world where happiness was considered a dangerous distraction from not being eaten, and millions of cycles of evolution had baked caution into their very chitin. He looked like someone had taken a beetle, stretched it to roughly human height, given it 6 limbs, and then told it about mortgage rates. His mandibles clicked in what more optimistic species might have called a rhythm, but was actually an unconscious stress response. "Attention," Colmeth announced, his voice carrying the peculiar harmonics of someone speaking through a biological voice box that had clearly read the manual on intimidation. "Today, we address xenofauna interaction protocols, specifically concerning apex predators from deathworld classifications." A ripple of unease went through the assembled students. Deathworlds. Lovely. Nothing said successful academic career quite like voluntarily learning to handle creatures from planets where evolution had apparently held a grudge. In the 3rd row, slightly to the left, sat the only human in the entire room. Irina Whitmore looked exactly like what she was, someone who had spent the last 5 cycles studying things that could kill her, and had found the experience delightful. She had the kind of calm demeanor that made other species nervous, because in their experience, beings who remained calm around danger were either predators themselves or catastrophically stupid. Humanity, as the galaxy was slowly learning, managed to be both simultaneously and somehow make it work. Irina's specialty was xenobiology, with a focus on predatory fauna. Her dissertation, Behavioral Patterns in Apex Species, Why Everything Wants to Eat You and How to Convince It Otherwise, had been cited in 18 different star systems and had gotten her banned from 3 others. She took notes on a datapad with the focused attention of someone who genuinely enjoyed her job, which made her an outlier in a room full of students who looked like they were attending their own funeral rehearsal. Colmeth's compound eyes swept across the assembled crowd and landed, inevitably, on Irina. They always did. She represented everything his species found terrifying about the universe: unpredictability, recklessness, and an unsettling enthusiasm for danger. "Today," he continued, mandibles clicking faster, "we will observe Thraxian rift cubs. These creatures are apex predators from Thrax Prime, a Class 12 death world where the ambient radiation alone would kill most of you before you finished complaining about it." He triggered a holographic display. The image that materialized above the podium would have made a recruitment poster for nightmares. The adult Thraxian rift beast stood roughly the size of an Earth elephant, if elephants were made of condensed violence and bad intentions. Its body was covered in overlapping obsidian scales that seemed to absorb light, broken only by bioluminescent stripes that pulsed in hypnotic patterns. Its head featured a crown of curved horns, and its mouth, currently open in a silent roar, displayed multiple rows of crystalline teeth designed to shred through pretty much anything. Someone in the back row made a noise that their species probably considered a whimper, but sounded more like a malfunctioning water filtration system. The adults, Colmeth continued, with the enthusiasm of someone describing a terminal illness, can generate enough bite force to crack through starship hull plating. Their claws secrete an acidic compound that breaks down organic matter on contact. They hunt in coordinated packs and have been observed taking down prey 50 times their body mass. He clicked to the next image. A group of Thraxian rift beasts surrounded what had presumably been something living, but was now more of an abstract art installation in red. They are, in technical terms, very good at killing things. Irina leaned forward slightly. Beside her, Falth, a being that looked like someone had convinced a geode to attend university, vibrated with concern. Falth had known Irina for 3 semesters now, and had learned to recognize that particular expression. It was the expression Irina got when she found something interesting. Falth had learned that when Irina found things interesting, chaos typically followed. And now, Colmeth continued, his tone shifting into what could only be described as aggressive foreboding, we come to the cubs. Another holographic image appeared. The Thraxian rift cubs looked like someone had taken the adults and shrunk them down to merely lion-sized instruments of destruction. They retained all the disturbing features of their parents: the black scales, the glowing stripes, the excessive number of teeth. In the image, 5 cubs were captured mid-play, which apparently involved attempting to disembowel each other while making sounds that instruments of war would find excessive. The cubs, Colmeth said, and his voice took on a quality that suggested he was about to deliver the galaxy's most terrifying safety briefing, are in many ways more dangerous than the adults. They are unpredictable. They have not yet learned to moderate their strength. Their pack instincts are still developing, which means they view everything as either family or food, and they have not yet learned to distinguish between the two. He paused, letting that sink in. In the silence, someone's breathing apparatus wheezed nervously. Over the next standard hour, you will observe the cubs from a secure location. You will not, under any circumstances, approach them. You will not make direct eye contact, as they interpret this as a challenge. You will not make sudden movements. You will not make loud noises. You will not, and I cannot stress this enough, attempt any form of physical contact. His eyes, all 6 of them, swiveled to lock onto Irina with the precision of targeting systems. Human Whitmore. Irina looked up from her notes. Yes, Instructor Colmeth? I am speaking to you specifically. I gathered that, yes. Your species has a documented pathology. Colmeth's mandibles were clicking so fast they were practically humming. You see a creature with teeth designed to rend flesh, claws that could disembowel you, venom that could dissolve your internal organs, and your collective response is to ask if it would like a snack and a belly rub. A few nervous laughs rippled through the chamber. Irina maintained her expression of polite attention. Humans, Colmeth continued, warming to his theme in the way that worried instructors do. Domesticated wolves. Wolves. You took apex predators and convinced them to live in your homes and where, and I have seen the documentation on this, sweaters. You have done this with numerous species on your planet. You have befriended creatures that should, by all logical assessment, eat you. To be fair, Irina said mildly, the wolves got a pretty good deal out of it. Regular meals, health care, companionship. They were apex predators. They were social pack animals who benefited from cooperation. We simply expanded the definition of the pack. Calumet made a sound like a filing cabinet being thrown downstairs. "This," he said, gesturing at Irina with two of his limbs while the others presumably held him back from having an aneurysm, "this attitude is precisely why I am implementing additional safety protocols today. The Thraxian Rift cubs are not wolves. They are not domesticatable. They are not your friends. They will attack if given the opportunity. And I will not have a fatality on my record because a human decided to test the "it just wants cuddles" hypothesis. I understand the safety protocols, Instructor. Do you? Do you really? Because I have now taught this course for 83 cycles, and I have never lost a student. My safety record is perfect. It is the thing I am most proud of, more proud than my 3 offspring, if I am being honest, which causes some family tension, but that is beside the point. The point is that I will not, absolutely will not, have that record blemished, because humanity has apparently evolved to look at teeth and see friendship potential. The entire room was watching now. This was better than the lecture. This was entertainment. Irina closed her data pad. "Instructor Calumet, I assure you, I have no intention of compromising your safety record or my own continued existence. I'm here to observe and learn, just like everyone else." Calumet studied her with the intensity of someone trying to read a contract written in disappearing ink. Finally, he made a sound that might have been resignation or indigestion. "Fine. But you, specifically you, will be monitored by additional security personnel. And if you so much as think about approaching those cubs, I will have you sedated and removed from the facility. Am I abundantly clear?" "Abundantly." "Good." Calumet turned back to the rest of the class, his chitin armor plates settling with a sound like shuffling cards made of bone. "Now then, let us proceed to the observation deck. Stay together. Follow the marked paths. Touch nothing. And for the love of all that exists in this uncaring universe, do not do anything a human would do." The class began to file out, a parade of species united in their nervousness and their sudden awareness that they were sharing space with a human, which, according to galactic consensus, was somewhat like sharing space with a ticking bomb that occasionally baked cookies. Falth drifted alongside Irina, their crystalline structure refracting the hallway lights into tiny rainbows. "You are planning something," they stated. It was not a question. "I'm planning to observe the cubs and take notes on their behavioral patterns." "You have that look." "What look?" "The look you get when you are about to prove an instructor wrong about something and cause a diplomatic incident." Irina smiled slightly. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "The last time you had that look, we ended up evacuating an entire wing because you convinced a Quellen Spike beast that you were its mother." In my defense, the Quellen Spike beast was experiencing maternal separation anxiety, and I successfully de-escalated a dangerous situation. You imprinted a 3-ton creature of pure aggression that now sends you letters. Holiday letters. It's very sweet. Falth made a sound like wind chimes in a hurricane. "I am going to position myself near the exits, for completely unrelated reasons. Probably wise." They walked on, following the crowd toward what promised to be either a routine educational experience or a complete disaster. In the galaxy's experience with humans, those two things had become increasingly difficult to tell apart. The observation deck was a masterpiece of paranoid engineering. Transparent aluminum viewports stretched across one entire wall, overlooking a habitat dome roughly the size of a small stadium. The dome itself was a recreation of Thrax Prime's natural environment, which looked like someone had asked a committee of geologists to design a theme park. Attraction called Imminent Death Mountain. Jagged rock formations jutted from rust-colored soil. Twisted vegetation that seemed more metallic than organic sprouted in defiant clusters. And the lighting system mimicked Thrax Prime's binary suns, which bathed everything in an orange-red glow that suggested the planet was permanently angry about something. Between the observation deck and the habitat dome were 4 separate barrier systems, each capable of stopping progressively more determined attempts at escape. The designers had clearly subscribed to the better safe than lawsuit school of architecture. The students filed in, arranging themselves along the viewing wall with the caution of people approaching a live munitions display. Some species clustered together for emotional support. Others spread out, apparently operating under the theory that dispersal would improve survival odds. One being, whose biology seemed to consist primarily of ambulatory gelatin in a mobility suit, had positioned itself directly next to the emergency exit and looked ready to achieve escape velocity at the first sign of trouble. Calmeth stood at a control podium, his limbs moving across the interface with practiced efficiency. The cubs are currently in the lower containment area. They have been fed recently, which reduces but does not eliminate aggression. When I activate the release mechanism, they will enter the main habitat. Your task is simple. Observe, document, and try not to faint. The last one is directed at you, Counselor Thelip. A small, furry being in the front row made an affronted noise, but didn't argue. Everyone had seen the video from last semester. Irina had positioned herself at the viewport, datapad ready, eyes already tracking the habitat's layout. She was cataloging sightlines, environmental features, and potential stress factors with the methodical attention of someone who had done this exact thing dozens of times before. Beside her, Falth had indeed positioned themselves near the nearest exit, which Irina pretended not to notice. Releasing subjects in 3, 2, 1. A section of the habitat floor irised open, and chaos erupted upward. The 5 Thraxian rift cubs exploded into the habitat with the energy of natural disasters that had somehow achieved consciousness and decided to make it everyone's problem. They were smaller than the adults, yes, but smaller was doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. Each one was easily the size of a full-grown lion, covered in those light-absorbing black scales that made them look like they'd been cut from the fabric of space itself. The bioluminescent stripes along their flanks pulsed in patterns that were either communication or just showing off, possibly both. The first cub hit the ground and immediately began attacking a rock formation. Not because the rock had done anything, but apparently on general principles. Its claws, each the length of a human finger, and glowing faintly, with that acidic secretion Calmeth had mentioned, gouged through stone like it was particularly firm cheese. The second and third cubs found each other and decided that the situation called for immediate violence. They collided with a sound like a minor vehicle accident, tumbling across the rust-colored soil in a tangle of scales, teeth, and what might have been playful growling or genuine murder attempts. It was genuinely difficult to tell. The fourth cub discovered a piece of the twisted metallic vegetation and began shredding it with the focused intensity of someone who had a grudge and plant matter to take it out on. The fifth cub, smaller than its siblings and with slightly dimmer bioluminescent stripes, hung back near the entrance. It watched the others with what Irina recognized, even from this distance, as uncertainty. While its siblings engaged in recreational destruction, this one moved to the far corner of the habitat and began exhibiting behaviors that Irina had seen before. Repetitive pacing, occasional glances back at the entrance, subtle postural shifts that suggested stress. "As you can observe," Calmeth announced, his voice carrying that particular tone of someone who was thoroughly convinced he was right about everything. The cubs are highly aggressive. Note the immediate violence, the territorial displays, the complete lack of restraint. This is why the species has never been successfully domesticated or even partially socialized. They are, in technical terms, murder on legs that has not yet reached full murder potential. The students were taking notes frantically. Some were recording video. One species that communicated through chromatic shifts was flashing colors that probably translated to various intensities of absolutely not. Irina, however, was frowning at her datapad. Her fingers moved across the screen, pulling up reference materials, cross-checking behavioral databases. Her eyes kept returning to the fifth cub, the one in the corner. "Instructor Colmeth," she said, not looking away from the habitat. "What's the enrichment protocol for these cubs?" Enrichment protocol? Colmeth's mandibles clicked in confusion. They are fed, housed, and monitored. What further enrichment could possibly be required? Environmental stimulation, social interaction outside their immediate pack, cognitive challenges, novel experiences. Irina gestured at the habitat. This environment is a recreation of their home world, but it's static. There's nothing new here, nothing to explore or investigate. It's just a box with familiar things in it. They are apex predators, human Whitmore, not pets requiring entertainment. They're also intelligent social animals with complex behavioral needs. Irina pointed at the two cubs still wrestling. Look at that interaction. They're not actually trying to hurt each other. Their claws are retracted at the strike points. Their bites are pulling short. That's not aggression. That's play. Rough play. Yes, but play nonetheless. Several students had stopped taking notes about the cubs and started taking notes about this conversation, sensing that it might be the more interesting data point. Colmeth's entire posture shifted into what could only be described as defensive academic mode. Play that would disembowel most species in this room. Play that's appropriate for their size, strength, and natural behavioral patterns. But look at the intensity. They're not engaged. They're bored. They're acting out because they're understimulated. Irina zoomed in on her datapad, enhancing the image of the fifth cub. And that one is showing classic stress behaviors. Repetitive pacing, environmental withdrawal, diminished bioluminescence. That's not aggression. That's anxiety. Falth vibrated with what might have been agreement or concern. She does make a point, Instructor. I have studied sufficient human literature on Earth fauna to recognize the patterns she describes. Earth fauna, Colmeth said, with the tone of someone who had found the core of the problem, which humans have an inappropriate relationship with. Successful relationship, Irina corrected mildly. We've been successfully reading and responding to predator behavior for thousands of cycles. It's literally how we survived. In the habitat, the wrestling cubs broke apart. One of them noticed something near the viewport, something small moving outside. It approached the transparent aluminum, bioluminescent stripes pulsing in a pattern that Irina's datapad flagged as curiosity adjacent. The cub tilted its head, studying the assembled students with eyes that reflected light in colors that didn't quite exist in normal space. Then it opened its mouth and made a sound. It was not the roar everyone expected. It was something between a chirp and a clicking noise, high-pitched and almost questioning in tone. Every student in the room tensed. This was clearly some kind of threat display, a precursor to attack, a warning that violence was imminent. Irina's face lit up. Oh, that's a juvenile contact call. It's trying to communicate. It is attempting to identify prey, Colmeth corrected. It's attempting to engage socially. Look at the body language. Head tilt, non-aggressive posture, stripes pulsing in a slow rhythm. That's not predatory behavior. That's curiosity. Before Colmeth could respond, an alarm began blaring. Not the gentle, "Please note this informational update" kind of alarm, but the "something has gone catastrophically wrong" variety that made everyone's fight-or-flight instincts sit up and take notice. Red warning lights bathed the observation deck in a color that highly suggested everyone should be somewhere else. Secondary containment door malfunction, a calm automated voice announced, which was insulting in its serenity. Initiating emergency protocols. Please remain calm and follow evacuation procedures. In the habitat, one of the doors, a door that should have been sealed tighter than a politician's campaign promises, began to slide open. The cubs noticed immediately. All 5 of them oriented toward the opening with the synchronized precision of predators recognizing opportunity. "Seal that door!" Colmeth shrieked into his communicator, his calm instructional demeanor evaporating like water on a hot skillet. "Seal it now! Activate backup systems! Where is security?" The door continued to open, apparently operating under its own understanding of appropriate timing. The first cub, the one that had been demolishing the rock formation, made a sound that was definitely not a juvenile contact call. This was the sound that evolution had designed to freeze prey in their tracks, while their brain processed that they had made poor life choices. Then it bolted through the opening. What happened next could only be described as coordinated pandemonium. The observation deck, which moments before had been filled with studious beings engaged in academic observation, transformed into a scene that would have made evacuation drill instructors weep. The gelatinous being achieved its earlier promise and was through the emergency exit before the alarm finished its second cycle. Several flying species took to the air, which would have been an effective strategy if the observation deck had higher ceilings. It did not. The resulting collision sounded like a wind chime factory exploding. Counselor Thelip fainted, vindicated in Colmeth's earlier prediction. One species tried to phase through the wall and got approximately halfway, before remembering they needed a specialized device to complete the process, resulting in a being stuck partially in a solid surface, making muffled sounds of distress. Colmeth was screaming into his communicator in 3 different languages, none of which were appropriate for academic settings. And through the chaos, moving with the fluid grace of something that had been designed by a committee of nightmares, came the cub. It entered the observation deck through a maintenance corridor that the door malfunction had helpfully left accessible. Its scales seemed to drink in the emergency lighting, making it look less like a creature and more like a cub-shaped absence in reality. The bioluminescent stripes pulsed rapidly, reflecting its excitement or aggression, or possibly just its elevated heart rate. The evacuation transformed from chaotic to absolute. Students were climbing over each other, teleporting into walls, activating emergency shields that mostly succeeded in trapping them in small bubbles of safety where they could watch the impending disaster in high definition. Within seconds, the observation deck was empty. Empty, except for one human, standing perfectly still in the center of the room, datapad forgotten at her side. Irina and the cub regarded each other across 3 meters of space that suddenly felt much smaller. From behind an overturned podium, Colmeth's voice emerged, pitched somewhere between terror and fury. "Human Whitmore, do not move. Security is responding. They will tranquilize the creature. Just remain absolutely still." Irina wasn't moving. She was barely breathing, but her eyes were active, tracking every detail of the cub's posture, every flicker of its bioluminescent stripes, every subtle shift in its stance. The cub took a step forward, Its claws clicked against the metal floor with sounds that were probably designed to intimidate prey into paralysis. Working as intended. It lowered its head slightly, and the ridge of horns that would someday grow into the crown of an apex predator caught the emergency lights at an angle that suggested perhaps remaining still was the only intelligent option in a universe of poor choices. Then it opened its mouth, revealing multiple rows of crystalline teeth that could punch through hull plating, and made a sound. The same sound as before. The juvenile contact call, questioning and almost plaintive. Irina's expression shifted. Something in her posture relaxed, just slightly, in a way that would have made every safety instructor in the galaxy scream. "Don't you dare!" Colmeth hissed from his hiding place. "Don't you even think about it! Human Whitmore, I am ordering you to remain motionless until security arrives." Irina slowly, very slowly, began to crouch down. Her movements were fluid, non-threatening, the kind of motion that spoke of someone who understood that sudden changes were what triggered predatory responses. "What are you doing?" Colmeth's voice had achieved a pitch that suggested several of his internal organs were trying to escape through his mandibles. Irina extended her hand, palm down, fingers relaxed. Not reaching toward the cub, just offering. An invitation, not a demand. The cub's head tilted, that same curious angle from before. Its bioluminescent stripes slowed their pulsing, shifting to a rhythm that Irina's abandoned datapad would have flagged as interest adjacent. Time seemed to negotiate with physics for a moment of stillness. The cub took another step forward, then another. It was close enough now that Irina could see the individual scales, could smell the ozone and copper scent that came off its body, could hear the sound of its breathing. Close enough that if this went wrong, security wouldn't arrive in time to matter. The cub lowered its head toward Irina's extended hand. Colmeth closed all 6 eyes. His 83-cycle safety record was about to end in the most predictable yet somehow still shocking way possible. The cub's nose, or what passed for a nose in its species, touched Irina's palm. And then, with a sound that no one in that room would have predicted if given 1,000 cycles and a predictive algorithm, the Thraxian rift cub began to lick Irina's hand. The licking was not gentle. The cub's tongue had the texture of industrial sandpaper that had opinions about flesh removal, and the saliva carried that faint acidic quality that Colmeth had warned about. Irina's hand was going to need medical attention, possibly skin grafts, definitely a very thorough washing. She didn't move. The cub licked again, then made a sound deep in its chest. Not a growl, not exactly. More like a rumbling purr filtered through a sound system designed for territorial intimidation. Its bioluminescent stripes shifted to a pattern that pulsed slow and steady, almost hypnotic in rhythm. Then it did something that made every remaining observer question their understanding of apex predator behavior. It head-bumped Irina's knee, not a gentle tap. This was a creature that massed several 100 kilograms of muscle, scale, and casual violence, and it had just applied that mass directly to a human leg with the enthusiasm of something seeking attention. Irina nearly toppled over but caught herself, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. The cub, apparently satisfied with this interaction, flopped onto its back. Its back, exposing its entire vulnerable underside, the pale scaling of its belly reflecting the emergency lights. Its legs sprawled in positions that suggested either complete trust or a catastrophic understanding of tactical positioning. From behind the podium, Colmeth made a sound like his worldview was actively disassembling itself. Irina, slowly, carefully, reached down and scratched the cub behind the ridge, where its auditory sensors clustered. The cubs' eyes, all four of them, slid half-closed. The rumbling purr intensified to a volume that made the floor vibrate. "Impossible," Calmeth whispered, mostly to himself. "That is impossible. They do not submit. They do not display vulnerable positioning to non-pack members. They certainly do not purr." "They're purring now," Falth observed from their position near the exit, their crystalline structure refracting the emergency lights into patterns that might have been amazement. In the habitat, the other four cubs had noticed their sibling's absence. More importantly, they had heard the sounds it was making, the sounds of a pack member who had found something interesting, something good, something worth investigating. The maintenance corridor was still open. Security still hadn't arrived, presumably because they were trying to coordinate a response that didn't involve weapons that might accidentally hurt the students, or, worse, fill out the associated paperwork. The second cub appeared in the doorway, then the third, then the fourth and fifth, the smaller one trailing behind with those same uncertain movements Irina had noted earlier. Four more Thraxian Rift cubs, each capable of turning the observation deck into an abstract art installation titled "Why We Have Safety Protocols," stood in the entrance. They saw their sibling on its back, getting scratches from a strange creature that smelled weird and looked fragile. They saw that sibling's bioluminescent stripes pulsing in patterns that meant contentment, safety, good thing found. And then, in a display that would be studied by xenobiologists for the next 50 cycles, all four cubs entered the observation deck and approached Irina. Not with aggression, not with predatory intent, with curiosity, with interest, with the universal body language of young social creatures who had just discovered that one of their pack was getting attention, and they wanted some too. "Security!" Calmeth shrieked into his communicator. "Where is security? We have five apex predators in the observation deck with a human." "Instructor?" Irina said calmly, now surrounded by cubs that were investigating her with nose bumps and experimental licks. "I really think you should stop calling them apex predators in that tone. You're going to give them a complex." The second cub decided that Irina's other hand needed attention, and shoved its head under her palm, with all the subtlety of a battering ram. The third cub discovered that human legs were apparently perfect for rubbing against. The fourth cub attempted to climb into Irina's lap, which was physically impossible given their relative sizes, but the cub seemed determined to defy physics through sheer willpower. The fifth cub, the smaller one, hung back. Its bioluminescent stripes were pulsing faster now, brighter. Its posture had shifted from that stressed withdrawal to something else. Something that looked like want, like uncertainty, like a question mark given scales and claws. Irina looked at it directly, maintaining eye contact in exactly the way Calmeth had said never to do. "Hey there," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the purring of the other four cubs. "It's okay. You can come here if you want." The cub took one hesitant step forward. Then another. Then it crossed the remaining distance in a rush and pressed itself against Irina's side with enough force to actually knock her over this time. All five cubs immediately adjusted position, creating a pile of scales, bioluminescence, and purring that had Irina buried somewhere in the middle. Security finally arrived, weapons ready, prepared for carnage and cleanup. What they found was a human xenobiologist sitting on the floor of the observation deck, completely surrounded by 5 Thraxian Rift cubs who were competing for prime petting position like oversized, heavily armed house cats. The security team leader, a being whose species had 3 separate words for different types of confusion, lowered their weapons slowly. "So," they said carefully, "should we tranquilize them, or?" From somewhere in the pile of cubs, Irina's voice emerged. They don't need tranquilizing. They need socialization and proper enrichment protocols. Also, could someone help me up? I think I've lost circulation in my left leg. Felth, from their safe position near the exit, made a sound like laughter filtered through crystal. I told you she had that look. Conference Hall Theta had been restored to something approximating order, though the atmosphere remained charged, with the kind of tension that follows events that really should not have happened, but definitely did. The students had been herded back into their seats, many of them still vibrating with residual panic or excitement or both. Counselor Thelip had regained consciousness and was being attended to by medical staff who kept assuring everyone that fainting was a perfectly reasonable response to witnessing the complete dissolution of established safety protocols. The cubs had been returned to their habitat, though returned was doing a lot of work in that sentence. What actually happened was that Irina had to walk them back herself because they refused to go with the security team and had made extremely loud unhappy noises when anyone else tried to approach. The sounds of 5 cubs whining for their new favorite person had echoed through the entire facility for a good 20 minutes and had probably traumatized at least 3 species who communicated primarily through similar frequencies. At the front of the hall, Kalmeth stood at his podium. His chitin plating looked duller than usual, and his mandibles were clicking in patterns that suggested his stress response had stress responses. His perfect safety record remained intact, technically, because no one had died. But his understanding of the universe had taken damage that would require significant philosophical repair. Irina sat in her usual seat, her hand wrapped in medical gel that was handling the minor chemical burns from cub saliva. She looked remarkably calm for someone who had just violated every safety protocol in the handbook and survived through what Kalmeth could only categorize as sheer inappropriate friendliness. "Human Whitmore," Kalmeth began, his voice carrying the quality of someone trying very hard to maintain professional composure. "I require an explanation." "For which part?" "For all of it. For why you approached a Thraxian rift cub in direct violation of every safety instruction. For why the cub did not immediately attempt to kill you. For why all 5 cubs then proceeded to treat you as if you were their pack leader. For why my entire understanding of xenofauna behavioral patterns is now in question." Irina set down her datapad. "Instructor, with respect, your understanding of these particular cubs was based on incomplete data." "Incomplete." Kalmeth's mandibles clicked faster. "I have studied Thraxian fauna for 40 cycles. I have reviewed every documented interaction. The species is categorized as non-domesticatable, highly aggressive, and unsuitable for socialization." "Based on what methodology?" That question landed in the room like an unexploded munition. "Based on standard xenofauna assessment protocols," Kalmeth said, his tone suggesting this should be obvious, "which involve isolation, controlled feeding, minimal environmental stimulation, and fear-based handling procedures." Irina's voice remained calm, factual. "You're creating the exact conditions that would make any intelligent social species aggressive. You're not observing their natural behavior. You're observing their stress responses." Several students were taking notes again, sensing that this was becoming an impromptu lecture on a topic not covered in the standard curriculum. "The cubs aren't naturally aggressive," Irina continued. "They're bored, understimulated, and lacking proper socialization outside their immediate pack. What you interpreted as attack behaviors were play behaviors. What you saw as territorial aggression was actually exploratory enthusiasm. They're babies, Instructor. Extremely large, well-armed babies, yes, but babies nonetheless." Babies that could disembowel most beings in this room. Babies from a species that evolved to be strong enough to survive on a Class 12 death world. That strength is just their baseline, not an indication of intent. The cub that approached me wasn't hunting. It was investigating. It made juvenile contact calls. It displayed curiosity postures. When I responded appropriately, it reciprocated with trust behaviors. Falth raised one crystalline appendage. If I may, Instructor Colmeth, I have researched human evolutionary history as part of a comparative study. Humans evolved as persistence hunters on a planet that actively tried to kill them on a regular basis. Their survival strategy involved understanding predator behavior, reading body language across species, and forming cooperative bonds with other apex predators. This is, quite literally, what they were designed to do. Designed is a strong word, Irina said. We adapted. We learned. We recognized that cooperation was more effective than confrontation. You domesticated wolves, Colmeth said, and the phrase carried the weight of an accusation. We didn't domesticate them through force. We formed a partnership. Wolves are pack animals with complex social structures. Early humans recognized that we had compatible survival strategies. We could hunt together, protect each other, share resources. The wolves that were comfortable around humans had better access to food. The humans with wolf allies had better hunting success and security. It was mutual benefit, not subjugation. And you believe this applies to Thraxian Rift cubs? I believe it applies to any intelligent social species. Those cubs are pack animals. They have social needs, emotional needs, cognitive needs. Keep them isolated and bored. And yes, they'll be aggressive because they're frustrated. Provide enrichment, socialization, positive interaction, and they'll respond accordingly. Before Colmeth could formulate a response that adequately expressed his complicated feelings about humans rewriting established xenobiological theory through the power of inappropriate friendliness, the hall's entrance doors opened. The being that entered didn't walk so much as drift, a floating mass of luminescent gas contained by a field generator that hummed at frequencies just below audible range. Wisp, the Institute's director, had a presence that made everyone sit up straighter despite the species lacking anything resembling a spine. Instructor Colmeth, Wisp said, their voice emanating from the field generator with the kind of calm that suggested they had been listening to everything. I have reviewed the security footage from today's incident. Director Wisp, I assure you that human Whitmore's actions, while unorthodox, did not result in any fatalities, and I maintain my safety record of... I am not here to discuss your safety record, though congratulations on maintaining it under such interesting circumstances. Wisp rotated slightly to face Irina. Human Whitmore, your approach to the Thraxian cubs was either brilliantly intuitive or catastrophically reckless. Possibly both, Irina admitted. The cubs have been monitored since their arrival at this facility 6 lunar cycles ago. Their aggression levels have been increasing steadily. The staff assumed this was normal maturation. Your assessment suggests otherwise. With respect, Director, their aggression was increasing because their environment wasn't meeting their needs. They're intelligent, curious, and social. They were going stir-crazy. Wisp pulsed in a pattern that might have been thoughtfulness. I have consulted with the xenobiology department. Your hypothesis is sound. More than sound, it's supported by comparative data from other species that showed similar patterns when proper enrichment protocols were implemented. Director, Colmeth interjected, surely you are not suggesting we overhaul our entire xenofauna program based on one human's interaction with... I am suggesting exactly that, Instructor. Wisp rotated to address the entire hall. The Institute exists to foster understanding between species. We have been approaching xenofauna with caution and distance, which has merit for safety, but may be limiting our comprehension. Human Whitmore has demonstrated an alternative approach. An approach that violates every safety protocol. An approach, Wisp corrected gently, that resulted in 5 aggressive cubs becoming docile in under a minute. That is not luck, Instructor. That is skill. The hall had gone completely silent. Even the species that communicated through background radiation had gone quiet. Wisp turned back to Irina. Human Whitmore, I would like to offer you a position redesigning our xenofauna interaction protocols. Your task would be to develop enrichment programs and socialization strategies that honor both safety requirements and the behavioral needs of the species in our care. Irina blinked. That's an incredible opportunity. It is also a significant responsibility. You would be establishing precedents that will affect xenobiological study across multiple systems. I understand. Do you accept? Irina glanced at Colmeth, whose expression was complicated in ways that required multiple faces to properly convey. Then she looked back at Wisp. Yes, absolutely, yes. Wisp pulsed in what might have been satisfaction. Excellent. Instructor Colmeth will assist you in understanding our current protocols so that you may improve them. I trust this will be acceptable. Colmeth's mandibles clicked in patterns that suggested acceptance, resignation, and a small amount of curiosity that he was trying very hard to suppress. If this prevents future incidents of humans approaching apex predators with nothing but misplaced optimism, then yes, Director, it is acceptable. Wonderful. I will expect preliminary reports by next cycle. Wisp drifted toward the exit, then paused. Oh, and Human Whitmore? The cubs have been officially registered as bonded to you. This means you are now responsible for their care, feeding, and continued socialization. Wait, what? They refused to eat after you left. They have also refused to allow any staff member to approach them. You have, in technical terms, been adopted. Congratulations. Wisp departed, leaving Irina staring at the space where the director had been. Falth made that wind chime laughter sound. You now have 5 Thraxian rift cubs as dependents. I believe this is what humans call consequences of your actions. I have 5 apex predators who think I'm their mother. Better start researching cub care protocols. I'm going to need so much more medical gel. From the front of the room, Colmeth made a sound that might have been a sigh or the final dissolution of his worldview. This is why we have safety protocols. This is exactly why. And now we are rewriting them based on humanity's collective inability to see teeth and not immediately attempt friendship. It worked out, though, Irina pointed out. This time, this one time, do not. And his voice carried the weight of someone who knew exactly how useful this warning would be. Do not think this means you should attempt this with other species. The universe has limits to how many times it will reward recklessness with success. Noted, Instructor. I mean it, Human Whitmore. Absolutely understood. You are already planning something, aren't you? Irina smiled slightly. I'm planning enrichment protocols for 5 cubs who need proper socialization and cognitive stimulation. And possibly looking into whether the Quellen spike beast would benefit from a similar assessment. Colmeth closed all 6 eyes. I am too old for this species. I am too old for this galaxy. I am especially too old for humans. 3 cycles later, security footage would capture Irina walking through the Institute's main concourse, data pad in hand, discussing enrichment strategies with Colmeth, who had apparently decided that if he couldn't prevent this chaos, he could at least document it properly for future generations to learn from. Behind them, 5 Thraxian rift cubs trotted in a line, their bioluminescent stripes pulsing in synchronized patterns of contentment. One of the cubs had somehow acquired a small piece of fabric wrapped around its neck. It looked suspiciously like the beginning of a sweater. Columeth pretended not to notice, but his mandibles clicked in patterns that suggested he had been right about everything, and the universe owed him an apology.